El News 24 únicamente en I24 News.
Just checking the sex.
Another boy.
Hello, welcome. You're watching I24 News coming to you from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. The United States denies a report that it's willing to greenlight an IDF operation in Rafah in exchange for a limited strike on Iran. Qatar says it's re-evaluating its role as mediator in hostage release talks. It says its role is being used against it. And the UN Security Council is set to vote within hours on a Palestinian bid for full membership. Those are the top stories this hour. Welcome. Well, a spokesman for the White House has told I24 News this Thursday that reports the US has given Israel the green light for an operation in Rafah are false. A Qatari newspaper had claimed that the US would agree to an offensive in the last Hamas stronghold in Gaza if Israel agreed to limit its response to Iran following Saturday's drone and missile attack. A separate report claims Israel won't strike Iran before Passover, which ends on Tuesday. More in this report.
Give and take, or avoiding a crisis. The Qatari-based Al Arabi Al Jadid is reporting that the US has signed off on Israel's plan to attack the last Hamas stronghold in Rafah in return for a muted Israeli response to the Iranian attack over the weekend. Earlier this week, the IDF called up 2 reserve brigades who could be sent to the Rafah front.
We will complete the destruction of Hamas's battalions, including in Rafah. There's no power in the world that can stop us.
Since the unprecedented massive Iranian attack early Sunday morning, Israel has been threatening its own response.
We are closely assessing the situation. We remain at our highest level of readiness. Iran will face the consequences for its actions.
I thank our nation's friends for their support in the defense of the State of Israel, both in supporting us in words and also with an active support. They also have all kinds of suggestions and advice. I appreciate that. But I wish to make one thing clear. We will make our decisions ourselves.
But the international community is urging Israel not to escalate the situation.
It's clear the Israelis are making a decision to act. We hope they do so in a way that does as little to escalate this as possible.
According to the Egyptian sources quoted by the Qatari newspaper, Israel has already begun airstrikes on the southern Gaza city, located on the border with Egypt. Although this report is unconfirmed, and it contradicts the US demands that Israel hold off on attacking Rafah until there are safeguards for civilians who could get caught up in the fighting, President Biden made this point Wednesday night, but confused Rafah with the Israeli city of Haifa.
And I made it clear to Israelis, don't move on Haifa.
Will Israel decide to put aside plans to retaliate against Iran? The decision now is in the hands of the Israeli government.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Lieutenant Colonel Dor Navital is the former commander of the Special Forces in the IDF. Good evening to you. And we're also joined by Yaki Dayan. He's the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles.
Good evening,
Yaki, as well. Dor Navital, all of a sudden, we are talking about Rafah again. Obviously, Iran has been dominating the headlines for the last few days. What do you think is happening here?
Well, I don't think there was a deal in those terms that Rafah in exchange for not attacking Iran. I mean, we have to calibrate our response towards Iran, and we have to calibrate the campaign against Rafah, when, how, in what fashion, taking into consideration, first, the Gazan citizens that are in Rafah, second, America, the U.S. consent or some sync with the Americans, and of course the Egyptian border, the Philadelphia route. There were some threats made by Egyptian, but I'm not sure the foreign minister or one of them saying, don't jeopardize the peace treaty. So taking all those consideration, we have to think what kind of campaign and when this campaign can be executed.
And Yaki Dayan, there is a kind of a similarity here, isn't there? There's been pressure on Israel not to go into Rafah, and of course there's now pressure on Israel not to respond too heavily to Iran. And the Foreign Minister, Israel Katz, has just thanked President Biden because the US has imposed further sanctions on Iran, Europe doing the same. They're hoping that will be enough, aren't they?
So everything is connected at the end of the day. Listen, the most important and urgent task for the Israelis is releasing the hostages. Now, most of the army is outside Gaza. I mean, we left Khan Yunis. We tripled the humanitarian aid. So you have to create new leverages in order to create some kind of an opportunity to release the hostages. And a new leverage would be entering Gaza, no doubt. That's a new leverage. There are a few other leverages. I mean, like the Americans pressuring Qatar, creating some kind of an alternative to the Hamas, but mainly creating a new military leverage. Now, on the Iranian issue, no doubt we have to take into consideration three things. The first one is the Americans. We have to coordinate it in some way with the Americans. The second one is the coalition. I mean, creating the coalition is a huge achievement. Now we have to make sure that we don't lose this coalition. And the third one, we have to make sure that any response will take into consideration that we are not expanding this war and not creating a new war with the Iranians. Now, the fact that the Americans now are moving on new sanctions is a huge move, because it's not only a military strike against the Iranians, it's also a diplomatic economic strike against the Iranians. And now leading into new sanctions is a huge deal, because if you remember correctly, the words in October ended the sanctions on Iran with the Security Council. So those new sanctions are a very big and new thing in the international community.
The sanctions are on leaders and entities tied to the IRGC, just to be clear, the Defence Ministry and the missile and drone programme as well. All right, we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But let's turn our attentions back to Rafah, because Egypt is one of the countries most concerned about the prospect of an IDF operation there, and it's been strengthening its border with Gaza in recent months. To talk more about that, we're joined by Haissam Hassanein. He's an adjunct fellow at the FDD, the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Thanks for being with us, Haissam. And this same Qatari newspaper has claimed that Egypt is once again right now strengthening its border in anticipation of an IDF offensive in Rafah. Is it true?
Thanks for having me, Laura. Yes, according to news reports in recent months, Cairo asked Washington to consider helping supply additional tranches of funding and new military equipment, such as radar systems, to secure the border with Gaza. Egypt worries that a Rafah invasion could push hundreds of thousands of people to its border. And while they have been fortifying their side of the border to ensure no loopholes for anybody to infiltrate, but there is an understanding they will have to take some refugees at some point. So the current Egyptian strategy is to minimize the number of Gazan civilians taken by all possible means. So this way they could ensure the return in the future, and also ensure that no militant Hamas members infiltrating the Egyptian borders among the civilians.
OK, well, meanwhile, the hostage talks have stalled once again, both Qatar and Egypt failing to get a deal. Does Egypt still have any leverage over Hamas?
Obviously, the non-successful hostage talks prove to Egypt that Hamas is a stubborn Muslim Brotherhood organization that only cares about its survival at the expense of the Gaza civilian population. And this means for Egypt, if Hamas continues to be a player in Palestinian politics, pro-Islamist governments like Qatar and Iran will continue to compete with the Egyptians over leverage inside the Strip. And if one thing Egypt wants to gain from the October 7th crisis is to be the main player in the Israeli-Palestinian arena again. mainly before the Arab Spring. So this, in order to restore this prestigious regional status, this won't happen as long as Hamas continues to have a say over matters inside Gaza.
Hi, Sam. We've been talking about the coalition that helped defend Israel on Saturday night, Jordan, the European allies, of course, and also Saudi Arabia and the UAE also reportedly playing a role as well. Another of Israel's Gulf allies, Bahrain, has been in talks with Egypt. The King of Bahrain was in Cairo yesterday. They want to find a peaceful solution to what's going on and in Gaza as well. Can you tell us a bit about what was said?
Yes, three things that dealt with. One, the upcoming Arab summit that will be hosted this May in Bahrain. Surely both Egypt and Bahrain want to coordinate on the most crucial regional issue of today, which is Gaza. Two, Egypt and its moderate Gulf partners, as much as they hate Hamas, but they want the war to stop the next day. This is to avoid hosting displaced Palestinians on Egyptian territory, and most importantly, avoid instability caused by Iran and its reckless regional proxies. They see an Israeli dismantling of Hamas a desired objective from one hand, but because it will give them more leverage on the Palestinian arena and open the door for replacing Iran, Turkey, and Qatar, the pro-Islamist governments, but also they are worried about an Iranian escalation, which will endanger their trade and economies, and most importantly, radicalization of the local public. The resistance axis in the region led by Iran is propagating, it's defending the Palestinians, while the Arabs are not doing much. So the moderate Arab camp in the Gulf and Cairo would like Israel to have a secret formula to balance between dismantling Hamas, in the meantime taking care of the Palestinian civilians, and in the meantime finding a way with the Iranian-led propaganda in the region.
Yeah, we're all looking to find that secret solution, aren't we? Thank you very much indeed. Hi, Sam. Great to talk to you. Hi, Sam Hassanein there at the FDD.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Qatar, meanwhile, has threatened to quit its role as mediator in talks for a hostage release and ceasefire in Gaza. Prime Minister Mohammed Al-Thani said Qatar's role was being used against it. US Congressman Steny Hoyer said earlier this week that the US should re-evaluate its role with Doha unless it put more pressure on Hamas to agree to a deal. Here's Al-Thani speaking earlier.
Unfortunately, we have seen that there has been an abuse of this mediation, and an abuse of this mediation in favor of narrow political interests. This means that the state of Qatar has called for comprehensive evaluations of this role. We are now at the stage to evaluate mediation and also evaluate how the parties engage in this mediation. We are committed to it from this humanitarian point of view, but there are also limits to this role and limits to the ability to which we can contribute to these negotiations in a constructive manner. The state of Qatar will make the right decision at the right time. Thank you.
And to talk more about Qatar, we're joined by Anshal Vora, international affairs columnist at Foreign Policy magazine. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And tell us, what does this move say about the concerns Doha has about its relationship with Washington?
I think it's been difficult for Doha to kind of explain why hostages have still not been released, particularly since American pressure has increased. And this pressure is coming from senators, it's coming from congressmen and women who've been to Qatar, or those who even haven't been to Qatar, and it's bipartisan. It's both from Republican and Democratic leaders of the US. And they're essentially saying Qatar ought to do much. Qatar is saying we are doing as much as we can, but in the end, it's about whether Israel gives in to Hamas's demands of a permanent ceasefire and an exchange of prisoners. And as long as that does not take place, they don't seem very hopeful that hostages would come back home. But it does go on to say that Qatar actually is under pressure and is not liking it very much. And I think this could either be a bluff, this threat, or they could be serious. But if they are serious, then Israeli government needs to sort of sit back and think, is there actually anybody else who has more leverage over Hamas than Qataris? And if not, then do they need to sort of tone down the pressure a little bit and ask their allies to, to tone it down a bit?
Well, critics say that Qatar hasn't done enough to pressure Hamas to agree to a deal. Is that a fair criticism? Could Doha have done more?
Well, Doha says it's doing as much as it can, and it says that it has been mediating in all sorts of such conflicts, if you remember, US and the Taliban as well, at the US's behest, and that it is doing it for humanitarian reasons. Could it have done more? Now, this is a really big question. I mean, I've lived in Lebanon, and I say that, I inform the viewers of that fact, because I understand that these groups, by these groups, I mean groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and I've covered Afghanistan extensively, such as Taliban, do have a mind of their own. But having said that, Hamas does not have many friends, many supporters, so to say. It does not have many supporters left. So if the Qataris were to say, look, guys, send back the hostages, or even we will not support you, I would wonder what Hamas's leadership would say. I mean, how many supporters are they left with? I mean, that's just Turkey or Iran left, right? So, I mean, this has been the big question, that could it use that tool? Could it use its immense leverage? Or actually it can't, because these characters, these actors, by that I mean Hamas's leadership, its leaders are very stubborn people.
And this is part of a broader strategy, isn't it, Anshal, that Qatar has had over the years. It wants to maintain good ties with both the West, but also its enemies. And it does have a special status with regards to the United States. It's a non-NATO major ally. Do you think that that strategy might not work with the ongoing escalation in the region?
I mean, it depends on who you mean by the West and who you mean by West as enemies. I'll just assume you mean here, let's focus on
Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah.
Yeah, I mean, all very different scenarios, all very different relationships. But if you look at Afghanistan and Taliban, and if you look at the current mediation that Qataris are doing between Israelis and Hamas, the broad strategy is that Qatar wants to play mediator. Qatar is a small state. It's a very wealthy state, but it's a small state. And it has its own concerns from its bigger neighbors, bigger Arab neighbors who surround Qatar and its riches. So the Qataris want to mediate, to also have, they want to be able to say, we're not just holding huge reserves of gas, but we're influential. We have a say. We're important. Here's what we can do. Here's how we can resolve things. So, they want a bit of a stature. Now, will they abandon that? I don't think so. That's why I'm saying I'm still not very sure whether this is just a bluff or whether it's a real threat. Maybe in this case, we'll have to see how it goes. I don't think they will walk out. But in other scenarios, I don't think Qatar is in any way going to abandon its position as a mediator, which it has worked on for years now to build itself, to present itself as one.
Anshal Vohra, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Laura.
Well, with me in the studio, Yaki Dayan and Doan Avital. And Yaki, do you think Qatar is worried that it has kind of burned its bridges with the United States? It hasn't managed to get a result despite its, much vaunted role as mediator. Do you think it's worried about what the US will do?
Yeah, not yet. I think that the US is still not pressuring enough the Qataris, because they still have a lot of leverages on the Qataris that they're not willing to use, such as their army base over there, or even the leadership of the Hamas and the financial activity of the Hamas that is still taking place in Qatar. And the Americans are not willing to push the Qataris to get rid of either the leadership or the financial resorts. So I don't buy this Qatari statement. I mean, they see that the negotiations. They are, because they see that the negotiations are failing, and instead of, they are the sponsors, obviously, of the Hamas. So instead of blaming the Hamas, they're blaming the Israelis there. And I think that they're playing such a negative role. But having said that, we need the Qataris right now, because they have still leverage on the Hamas, and we don't have many volunteers for that. But we have to remember that, as was mentioned right now, I mean, the Qataris, they are a small state, and they are looking to increase their influence, and by serving as the negotiator, as the mediator, they increase their influence, the regional influence. So they want to continue that. But when they see that the negotiations are failing, instead of blaming the Hamas and putting more pressure on the Hamas, they turn to the easiest resort, which is blaming the Israelis.
So it's better to quit before you get fired.
Exactly.
Kind of scenario. Doron Avital, I mean, Hamas has turned down numerous offers of a ceasefire and hostage release deal. Always a temporary ceasefire. Has Hamas just simply been stringing Israel along for the last few weeks?
No, I'm not sure. I mean, there were a few points along the way that maybe the military pressure together with some kind of a bigger mandate to our negotiation team could have resulted with some outcome which would be more beneficial. I don't know. Soul searching we'll do afterwards. But right now we have to be very constructive and to see how do we succeed to facilitate at least the humanitarian phase. Of course, there's one thing we cannot accept. We cannot accept a cessation of all fire. We cannot accept the end of the war. But given this limit of the equation, I say perhaps we can do more in terms of allocation of Gazan citizens to the north. In terms of the exchange rate, I don't think this was never the real issue in terms of the negotiation.
Do you think there have been reports that the Israeli strike that killed Ismail Haniyeh's 3 sons affected the talks?
The Hamas. Yeah, it's interesting. Hamas announced that it has no effect, but I still think that a decision like this made by a colonel, if indeed this was the case, and doesn't go up the chain of command in such a crucial moment in the negotiation wasn't a smart move. Mistakes are made in war. I'm not sure what was the war picture that this colonel had when he made the decision. The decision was made, part of what's perhaps mistake made in the war. I'm not sure whether it had an effect, but for sure such a decision in this very stressful moment had to be done or executed by somebody higher in the chain of command.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that at the end of the day, this is Sinwar's decision, not Haniya, not anyone else. This is Sinwar's decision, and Sinwar wants to see one thing, and this is cessation of fire, a cessation of war, a complete cessation. And he feels rather comfortable now because the army is out, the humanitarian aid was tripled, so he doesn't have any pressure right now to move with any hostage deal. And as long as he doesn't see the ultimate result, he can negotiate as much as he wants. So I don't think that this is something like the Haniya sons being eliminated or something like that, which makes the major effect. The major effect is because he feels now relieved. He doesn't feel under pressure, nor by the Qataris. So he can continue and drag it on and on.
All right.
Yeah, it's true that some leverage is required, but we have to understand Hamas now is working on its survival, not on fighting against us in many respects. There's still guerrilla warfare, but and the
best way to survive is to get outside.
And in
pressure
terms of its survival, we have to think what's the end game for this game, and in this context, maybe some exchange can be executed.
All right, thank you very much. All right, a story of 2 soldiers now, Avi and Aviad. They've undergone a unique experience. 1 year after Aviad donated one of his kidneys to Avi, they have both ended up serving in Gaza, making their bond stronger than ever. More Ellen and Hannah Rifkin have the story.
Do you know that they're going to put me in jail if you go on TV with that blue tongue?
A life worth living and finding yourself worthy of it. This is Avi Capone's mission. This mentality comes from his experience as a lifelong kidney patient with a unique story. Making it even more unique is that chance dictated that he would end up fighting in Gaza alongside his donor.
I donated a kidney to him. Adina, Avi's wife, and my wife, Aviva, have been friends for many years, and we know each other through them.
How they ended up here, of course, started with a first date and a fateful journey.
Pretty early on, when I met Adina, I told her that I have a kidney disease, that one day would get to the point that I would need a transplant. From there, it started rolling. She saved my life. I owe her now.
Eventually, he was informed that this was the progress of the disease. I said that I would gladly donate mine.
It was a no-brainer. Aviad got tested, and he was a match.
היי אביעד לך יקר, קשה להאמין, אבל עשינו את זה. זה פשוט לא יאומן. פשוט לא יאומן. קשה לתאר במילים. בוקר טוב אבי, מה העניינים? אתה נראה מצוין. שמח לשמוע שנראה שהכל נקלט מצוין ושאתה ושזה עבר על הצד הטוב ביותר. אני גם מרגיש על הכיפק.
המשבר הנפשי הכי גדול שהיה לי הוא היה...
The biggest breakdown that I had was on the first Saturday after the transplant, while I was still in hospital, and I realized there is no possibility of returning the favor. In everyday life, you receive favors that you can pay back. All that's left to do is to be worthy of it, to be worthy in the way that you live and behave, to be worthy of this unbelievable thing.
הדבר הבלתי נתפס הזה.
And then, fast forward more than a year to October 7th.
In the first week of the war, I was in Reim. From October 8th, Avi was in the same area with his unit. We didn't meet up, but I was told that someone from that unit was looking for me, so we texted each other. I realized it was him. We went on patrol together. Inside Gaza, we weren't together. We were there at different times and different places.
But seeing each other when they could. Both volunteered for reserve duty.
When I went to war, I saw it as a war of virtue, and the only person I asked an opinion from was Aviad's wife, Aviva. And thankfully she said, "Go, do what you have to do, and if you lose this kidney as well, I will donate you my own."
Avi explains that being a combat fighter and a kidney patient isn't simple, but it is something he's learned to manage.
Like many other things in life, when you're determined, things work out. I have been a combat fighter for many years, and I was a kidney patient for many years as a soldier while fighting in wars. Since Operation Defensive Shield in 2002, my kidney function has been 50%, as well as during the Second Lebanon War in 2006 and Operation Protective Edge in 2014. I know how to handle the disease with the medications, the pills, during combat.
And this is how Avi lives a worthy life. He and Aviad want others who are going through similar conditions to know that limitations are not as limiting as one may think. Kidney patients and kidney donors can do just as much as anyone else.
There are some consequences. It's something that's important to say. It's a very important process which definitely saves lives. And that's why I think it's worth the price. But it needs to be said that the decision to donate a kidney should be taken seriously.
Since the war began, their bond has only become stronger. More Ellen and Chana Rifkin for I-24 News.
What the hell is with your tongue?
Friends for Life, good luck to them. Well, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, the UN Security Council is set to vote on a Palestinian bid for full UN membership. That would essentially mean recognising a Palestinian state. We'll have the very latest from New York right after this. Stay tuned.
Israel is in a state of war. Families completely gunned down in their beds. We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front line, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
1, go!
One.
That means a new Guinness World Records title.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24 únicamente en I24 News.
Welcome back. The UN Security Council is set to vote within hours on a Palestinian bid for full UN membership. That would essentially mean recognising a Palestinian state. Let's go to New York. Our senior US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, is standing by. Mike, will the US use its veto tonight, or are we going to see another abstention?
The U.S. hasn't come right out and said it, but it's given every possible otherwise indication or signal that they will veto this resolution here this evening. The vote finally scheduled to take place at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, midnight in Israel, to allow everybody who was flown in for the Security Council meeting today to get a chance to speak before the vote. I think the bigger question, and the deputy Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations said so in a tweet. I tend to agree with at least that perspective. He said all the focus right now is on one country. Every vote matters, and I think it's going to be more indicative, not just whether the U.S. vetoes or not, which they will, but where does everybody else stand at the moment? There are 4 countries or so kind of just waving in the wind right now in terms of the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Switzerland, typical U.S. allies who look like they may abstain. And it will give us a much broader perspective on really how much support is there for the Palestinian full membership here at the United Nations. Is it only the United States standing in the way, or are there other, verifiable concerns among other countries? And that'll give us an indication of how tough the Palestinians' road to full membership here at the UN will be in the coming years as well, based on the situation on the ground in the region.
And Mike, if the US is alone tonight in that vote, or today where you are, what would be the implications for President Biden as he heads for re-election?
I don't think whether the U.S. vetoes this resolution tonight or not will have any impact on domestic political considerations there for Joe Biden. It's more of a signal to the region here on where exactly the United States stands, where it is in terms of the peace process, in terms of a roadmap to the two-state solution. The Biden admin put out, word a couple of months ago that they wanted to start building a substantive roadmap that involves milestones, markers, parameters to a Palestinian state, to a two-state solution. We've really seen very little of that, mainly because of the other activity that's been going on in the region right now. So it doesn't just end with a U.S. veto here tonight from the United States. I think in the coming months, as the war starts to shape out, and God willing will end in the coming months, I think that will be more of a barometer of where the Biden administration stands in its opening measures after the war is over toward a two-state solution.
And what would be the real-world implications of that vote passing if there was a state of Palestine at the UN?
That's a huge hypothetical and probably a waste of our breath to talk about at this point, because it's simply not going to happen. And by the way, if the United States allows this to pass, there are also financial considerations for the United Nations. And by the way, those were brought up in discussions here in the past week at the UN with the Security Council Committee on Membership, discussing any membership for the Palestinians here at the UN would cut off U.S. funding for the UN. The UN's in financial peril to begin with. You cut off U.S. dollars, they might as well close the doors here. So that's a consideration as well. It's simply not going to happen. And by the way, the United Kingdom ambassador, Barbara Woodward, spoke about a half hour, 45 minutes ago here. Again, didn't come out and say it, but signaled that now is not the time for Palestinian full membership here at the UN. I would imagine the UK, if it doesn't vote against as a permanent member and veto power, they will at least abstain here. So I don't think the US, by any measure, is going to be alone tonight in rejecting in some form or fashion Palestinian membership here at the UN.
Mike, thank you very much. Mike Wagenheim there over in New York. And a reminder that I'm joined in the studio this hour by Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, the former commander of the Special Forces in the IDF, and Yaki Dayan, the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles. Thank you for staying with us. So Israel says it would be a reward for terrorism if the UN Security Council was to vote in favour of that Palestinian.
Absolutely. Any decision about a Palestinian state right now is a reward for the slaughter that took place on October 7th, no doubt. I think that the US tried to avoid this veto, using this veto tonight very much. They even spoke to Mahmoud Abbas and tried to convince him not to have this move, and they tried to have enough countries not to support this resolution. But I think at the end of the day, the United States will have to veto this resolution, and it shows to anyone that is doubting that without the American umbrella, diplomatic umbrella, and the military umbrella that we're receiving with from the Americans, the life of the Israelis would have been so much more difficult. So thank God we have this ally, the United States.
Do you agree with Mike that it won't have any impact on US domestic politics? There's been a lot of talk about all these voters in Michigan.
Yeah, it won't. It won't. At the end of the day, I don't think something like that would affect that. Eventually it's the decision between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and this is the decision. There are so many other aspects which are so much more important for the average American, from the economy to the immigration to abortion. I think those decisions will eventually determine that. I don't see the voters in Michigan not coming out to vote for Biden, and by that giving the victory to Trump.
Doron Avital, this diplomatic pressure on Israel, how is it affecting the war in Gaza?
I think from the perspective of Israel, mind not the Americans and their inner politics, I mean, the question is not what the Palestinians said, the question of the positioning of the Palestinian Authority in terms of in the context of the day after in Gaza. And our refusal to see the Palestinian Authority in whatever capacity participating in the day after of Gaza, our allies don't like it, and the coalition around us don't like it, and I don't think we can hold for this position for too long.
They don't like Israel's position towards the PA.
Exactly. I mean, in the end, even when we think about the 7th of October...
Because Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, no way am I handing Gaza
exactly.
over to the PA.
And we've been saying here in those studios that we were funneling financial resources from Qatar to Hamas, and we're trying to undermine the Palestinian Authority. So if indeed we made this terrible mistake, now we have to rethink the whole positioning. It's true the Palestinian Authority is very weak, old, weak, doesn't have any command in northern Samaria. We have constant special forces war in the West Bank, no question about that. But in the end, there's no other address to the Palestinian case with which we can plan the day after, in the context also of the coalition, the moderate Sunnite countries, Egypt, Jordan, whatever. So we have to think seriously our attitude towards the Palestinian Authority. Of course, it's not the time to discuss Palestinian state. It's too far in the horizon. But the Palestinian Authority is the only possible...
But Israel's allies say it is the right time to discuss
No, I'll tell you what. I think that the Americans are really thinking about a revitalized Palestinian Authority, and they hope that Mahmoud Abbas would disappear from the scenery as soon as possible. And I agree with Doron. You can call it's semantic. You can call it whatever you want. A revitalized Palestinian Authority, a different authority. But at the end of the day, you have to create some kind of an alternative to the Hamas that will control that. And you have an opportunity now, because the northern part of Gaza, which is rather empty from Palestinians, can serve as a pilot for any revitalize something. But as long as you don't, this is a significant leverage on the Hamas. So you have to create some kind of an alternative, and eventually the Israelis will have to play accordingly, because they want the moderate Arab countries. They want to get rid of Qatar.
Saudi Arabia has conditioned normalization on concrete steps towards creating a Palestinian state.
that would be a bit more difficult, Laura, because Saudi Arabia wants some kind of a recognition in a Palestinian state, not an authority. And in a Palestinian state, I think that there is currently consensus in Israel that regardless if you are in the right side of the map or left side of the map, but no one would agree to recognize a Palestinian state now. But a revitalized Palestinian Authority, which would be completely different with different people and different authorities heading to Gaza, that can be some kind of an alternative to the Hamas.
Okay, all right, thank you both. Well, Algeria has granted $50 million to the Palestinian refugee agency UNRWA. That's according to Algerian state media. Algeria is a staunch supporter of the Palestinians. There was recently outcry after a branch of the US fast food chain KFC opened in Algiers. It was forced to close down just a few days later. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Alyssa Pavia. She's Associate Director at the North Africa Programme at the Atlantic Council. Great to see you, Alyssa. Thank you very much for being with us. Clearly, they're not so fond of Kentucky Fried Chicken in Algiers, but on a more serious note, I mean, Algeria has often been behind the push for ceasefire resolutions in the UN. And what are their motivations here in trying to push ahead with recognition for the Palestinian cause?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back, Laura. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so Algeria has always been a staunch supporter of the Palestinian cause and has pushed for, ceasefire resolutions at the UN Security Council on multiple occasions. There's multiple reasons behind this, and one of them is that, Algeria does kind of try to promote itself as being the leader of the non-aligned and kind of global South movement. It's always like to champion itself and its foreign policy agenda as being, the leader of all occupied or nations that are under occupation, right? And so it kind of always shows the Palestinian cause as being the cornerstone of its foreign policy agenda. So there's definitely that kind of willingness of always wanting to be the leader of the underdog, let's say, because Algeria itself sees itself as an underdog, having itself been a power under colony, under French occupation. So that's one of the main reasons. And then also there's just, a affinity between the people of the Algerian people and the Palestinians that, underscores all decisions that come from Tebboune.
Does regional politics come into this as well, Alyssa? Perhaps Algeria playing on archenemy Morocco's relations with Israel in order to, boost the support of its adversaries, Iran, for example, the Polisario Front in Western Sahara?
Of course. Yeah, Morocco always plays a significant role in all of Algeria's foreign policy decisions. Morocco and Algeria have been at odds with one another since both of them gained independence from France in the 60s and 70s, and that has underscored both countries' foreign policy agenda. And so ever since we've seen, the normalization of ties between Morocco and Israel in 2020, Algeria has definitely leveraged that for its own foreign policy agenda, and also has been very outspoken against the normalization of ties with Israel. And so once again, the two countries, Morocco and Algeria, are hostile to one another. So whenever Algeria can kind of use something to use a foreign policy decision to undermine Morocco's stance in the geopolitical realm of the region, then it does so.
There's a lot of discussion right now, of course, of future Palestinian leadership and what that will look like. Is Algeria positioning itself as a player in all of that?
It certainly wants to be a player. I mean, it has played a significant role in reconciliation talks before October 7 between different factions within the Palestinian within the Palestinian territory. So it did host talks between, let's say, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in the past. There is something to be said, though, about Algeria's fraught relationship with Hamas, because just like many Arab nations in the region, there's this underlying tension between the national governments in this case, President Tebboune, and generally speaking, the Muslim Brotherhood. And so Hamas, again, being linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, is seen in Algeria as a threat to the government. But at the same time, they do want to maintain kind of that strong relationship with the Palestinians. So it really remains to be seen as to what happens to Gaza next. But Algeria definitely wants to play a strong role in kind of shaping and molding what happens afterwards in Gaza.
Alyssa Pavia, great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Yaki Dayan, so many countries around the world really use the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians for their own domestic agendas, don't they?
So let's remind ourselves. I mean, Algeria was kept outside the Abraham Accords, and not only that, but the Americans, in order to bring on board the Moroccans, they recognized the West Sahara, which was a big blow for the Algerians. So, and no doubt that they are considered as an extremely negative force in the region, not only by the Israelis, but by the Americans as well. So they cannot and will not play any role, not a significant and not a minor role in building the Palestinian Authority. The only thing that they can do is supporting UNRWA, which is, by itself, maybe it gives them some kind of internal boost, but not more than that. And UNRWA is also an organization that by the time we had to get rid of that and use this war from October 7th to use that in order to get rid of UNRWA and create a new organization in the region.
Meanwhile, Israel's ties with Morocco steaming ahead. Israel's just opened a drone factory in Morocco this week.
No, Morocco was always, in terms of the whole history of Israel with the Arab country, it was always with Morocco. It's the first time that Rabin or Moshe Dayan used to take these skies and go to visit the Moroccan leaders. I think it brings forward the most serious point that we have to address, and the fact that we are part of a coalition. Mm-hmm. This is a coalition game, the Biden doctrine, and we have to play a constructive role in this coalition. And I think the next step after Abraham Accords would be naturally, and if it would be Biden or Trump, the next phase would be something along the lines of the Biden initiative. It would be called the Trump initiative next time, but
not necessarily. We don't know.
No, if
Biden might surprise.
No. I think Biden would be elected. I'm just saying.
Okay.
If Trump, no.
Okay.
But I think if Trump is elected, this would be called. It will have a different name. But we are part of a coalition. We have to play constructively in war and in peace
in the White
with
House.
our coalition.
I'm surprised that in the very beginning they called it the Abraham Accords and not
Trump Accord.
Doron Avital and Yaki Dayan, thank you very much indeed to you both. Now, years after they were defeated in Iraq and Syria, tens of thousands of ISIS fighters remain in prison camps, which are guarded by the US-backed Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. Well, Amnesty International is out with a report today claiming that torture and disease are widespread at these camps. Some 56,000 people are trapped there, including around 30,000 children. Joining us now, Omar Al-Muqdad is a Syrian journalist and filmmaker. Great to have you with us, Omar. Thank you for joining us. Many of those being held in these camps, Al-Hol and others, hold foreign citizenship, European citizenship in some cases. How long can these camps continue to operate with no effort to repatriate them?
Well, thanks for having me back on, Laura. In fact, the whole idea of squeezing thousands of people into a detention center without due process, without charge, without accusation, it's by itself is a violation of international law and a human rights law. But the problem here is that most of these countries that you just mentioned, the European Union, even the United States, they seem very comfortable with this idea of just holding these people in these facilities forever, and instead of taking their citizen back and hold them accountable for what's being done. And let's remember, we're talking here about thousands of women and children, not just ISIS fighters. And that's the definition of a collective punishment, of punishing not just the guy who joined the ISIS body and committed atrocities, which no one is going to argue with that, but also taking their families and held them accountable for what that person did. The whole idea of just keeping this in a place without finding a solution to the whole matter is inhuman. And as I mentioned before, these countries seems to be very keen and happy. Let's put them in this camp and forget about them. And by the way, regarding the human rights reports, which just came out last night, talking about human rights abuses in these prison camps. These human rights abuses, it's been done since day one. They set up this camp, and most of it comes as a revenge act by these prison guards, who thinks that many of these ISIS fighters played a huge role of killing their colleagues, friends, or family members.
And the report also says that some of ISIS's victims are being held in these camps as well, members of the Yazidi community, for example.
Yes, this is the problem, that you can't distinguish between who is the bad and who's the good here. So that's why this prison camp has to come to an end, or held these people who done atrocities accountable for what they did, and for the innocent people just to go on and continue their lives. We're talking about children who's now grown up in these prison camps, and that can't just keep going.
And of course, the US does support the Kurdish-led SDF. Do you think that the US has some responsibility here?
Of course, the United States has a huge responsibility for what's going on, because they are funding these prison facilities. They are the primary funder of these prison facilities, and they know what's going on there. So the idea that to pretend that we don't know what's going on, we can't distinguish, or this game that they are playing, we can't distinguish between the bad and the good. It's all ridiculous, in my opinion. These people must be sent for the fighters, those who are confirmed to be a previous ISIS fighters. They must be sent to a military court. They have to be held accountable for what they have done, and for the rest of those people, they have to go back to where they belong, to their countries. You can't just throw your soldiers and your citizens in these camps in Syria and tell the Syrian to deal with the problem that these countries created to begin with.
Omar, thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you. Omar Al-Muqdad.
Thank you.
Well, as fears of a regional war worsen, the temperature at anti-Israel protests in the West has been soaring. This week, pro-Hamas activists burned American flags on the streets of New York. They also flew Hezbollah flags, and some chanted, "Iran, you make us proud," after the Islamic Republic fired hundreds of missiles at Israel. Missiles that, of course, were shot down with the help of the United States and Arab countries as well. Well, my next guest has warned that radical Islam is gaining a foothold in the West. Yasmin Mohammed is a women's rights activist and the author of Unveiled, How the West Empowers Radical Islam. Yasmin, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura.
Last time we spoke, we were talking about the show of support on streets of Western cities for terrorist groups, for Hamas, right after the October 7 attacks, and also for Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and now the Islamic Republic of Iran. It has only got worse, hasn't it? How has the West managed to kind of lose control of this?
Yeah, well, they never actually took control of it, right? They've just been allowing these groups to be empowered year after year after year until they were so empowered they felt comfortable, screaming takbir in the streets of Toronto in celebration of Iran dropping missiles on Israel. And like you said, this is in the West, they've got, the problem of both Islamists and Marxists working together in unison, agreeing on certain hateful things, like obviously anti-Semitism, and also just being anti-West.
Right, I mean, people burning American flags in New York City, of course, where the World Trade Center was destroyed.
Yeah, it's crazy that these people are anti-Western values, yet they're supporting groups like Hamas and the Houthis and Iran. Like, these people would say that they are, that they are going to support LGBT or support women's empowerment or, support equality and freedom and all of these different things that they purport, as progressives that they support, yet they go ahead and support groups that are the exact opposite of that, Queers for Palestine or Strippers for Gaza. Like, they don't realize that you are the antithesis of what Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, in Iran you can be you can be imprisoned and you can even be killed in some cases over a cloth on your head, you know, or over drinking alcohol, or over having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. You know, how are they championing such barbaric ideologies?
Yeah, right. And a bit closer to where we are now, you know, last time we spoke, you said it's very important for people not to conflate Gazans with Hamas. You, of course, yourself were born in Gaza.
My father was.
Your father, I'm sorry, was born in Gaza. But you experienced Islamist hardship yourself.
Absolutely.
There were some really distressing images that came out last night of Yarden Bibas, one of the hostages. He was surrounded by a mob of Gazans. They weren't in Hamas uniforms. They were beating him, mocking him. It was very distressing to see. I mean, how does that square with what you said?
Well, the truth is, Laura, no country, no even city, you know, is a monolith, right? There's always going to be people, you know, there's no question that you know, I'm sad to say this, but obviously the majority of people in Gaza agree with the ideology of Hamas. But there are people like my dad, who I was mentioning to you before, who really have always been pro-peace, have always been, you know, pro both groups of people, Israelis and Palestinians, living side by side in peace and harmony. But
he had to leave, obviously. I mean, do you think the people who want peace are just giving up and trying to get out?
In some ways, yes. And even in the diaspora, even in Canada, he had his YouTube channels and he had his Facebook, you know, channels and all that stuff. But he was still being attacked. You know, he was still being called a traitor. He was still being accused of like being a Mossad agent, et cetera, et cetera. So it is very dangerous to speak up when you don't support Hamas, because they are a terrorist group and their supporters are terrorists and terrorist supporters. So it is very scary to speak up against them. So it's really hard for us to know exactly how many of them are against the ideology. And even if they're not against the ideology, it's hard for us to know how many people in Gaza actually just hate Hamas, you know, like maybe they recognize how the leaders of Hamas are all, you know, living in Qatar and billionaires.
People who speak out are killed. We've seen evidence of that. And
yes,
just real quick, Yasmin, are you hopeful for the future when this war finally ends?
Well, Laura, to be honest, you know, after October 7th, I said, well, you know, I'm actually glad my father isn't here to see the destruction of his homeland, because I knew this was the end of Gaza. Like, there was no way that this independent state that he had dreamed of was ever going to come to fruition. Like, that's it. It wouldn't even be fair to even ask the people of Israel if that was an option. But I do see that there could possibly be hope if we were to support the young, secular people in Gaza who really do want to have a free state instead of the West supporting groups like Hamas.
Yeah, all right, absolutely. Yasmin Mohammed, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. This is I24 News.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, espadas de hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It is day 195 of Israel's war against Hamas. And despite pulling out many of its ground troops, the IDF is fighting on in central Gaza with raids and airstrikes over the last few days. The IDF saying they've destroyed over 100 terrorist infrastructures, including 17 tunnel shafts, and eliminating more than 40 terrorists in face-to-face battles and airstrikes, among them a top Hamas intelligence officer. But as the Passover holiday approaches, two big questions hang over Israel's defense establishment. If and when the IDF will move into Rafah, Gaza's southernmost city and the last stronghold of Hamas, and if and when Israel will strike back at Iran for its unprecedented air attack last weekend. Now a new report suggests those two issues have become closely connected, especially when it comes to coordinating strategy with Israel's indispensable ally, the U.S. Shai Yakir takes a closer look.
Give and take, or avoiding a crisis. The Qatari-based Al Arabi Al Jadid is reporting that the US has signed off on Israel's plan to attack the last Hamas stronghold in Rafah in return for a muted Israeli response to the Iranian attack over the weekend. Earlier this week, the IDF called up 2 reserve brigades who could be sent to the Rafah front.
We will complete the destruction of Hamas's battalions, including in Rafah. There's no power in the world that could stop us.
Since the unprecedented massive Iranian attack early Sunday morning, Israel has been threatening its own response.
We are closely assessing the situation. We remain at our highest level of readiness. Iran will face the consequences for its actions.
I thank our nation's friends for their support in the defense of the State of Israel, both in supporting us in words and also with an active support. They also have all kinds of suggestions and advice. I appreciate that. But I wish to make one thing clear. We will make our decisions ourselves.
But the international community is urging Israel not to escalate the situation.
It's clear the Israelis are making a decision to act. We hope they do so in a way that does as little to escalate this as possible.
According to the Egyptian sources quoted by the Qatari newspaper, Israel has already begun airstrikes on the southern Gaza city, located on the border with Egypt. Although this report is unconfirmed, and it contradicts the US demands that Israel hold off on attacking Rafah until there are safeguards for civilians who could get caught up in the fighting, President Biden made this point Wednesday night, but confused Rafah with the Israeli city of Haifa.
And I made it clear to Israelis, don't move on Haifa.
Will Israel decide to put aside plans to retaliate against Iran? The decision now is in the hands of the Israeli government.
And joining us now is Danny Danon, a member of Knesset for the ruling Likud party and the former Israeli ambassador to the UN. Knesset member Danon, thank you for joining us. First of all, let me ask you, in light of that report, is it Rafah or Iran, or is it both? And if so, where is the priority lie? Because those two may complicate things for each other, the operation on either one.
I think we have to deal with all the threats that we have and all the challenges that we have. Rafah is a must. It's a must because Hamas is still there. About 25% of the Hamas battalions are still functioning in Rafah. So we will have to operate in Rafah. I believe that we will allow the population to move out before we come in, like we did in northern Gaza, so that it will take some time to maneuver. Regarding Iran, I think today there is an understanding in the international community, Caleb, that Israel will respond. I will not tell you where and how, but we will retaliate. We have to retaliate. We have to reconstruct the deterrence of Israel. And after what we have seen last Saturday night, I think it's obvious that we will show the Iranians not only our defense capabilities, but also our offensive capabilities.
Well, Danny, I know you've been speaking with foreign officials and diplomats trying to build up support, but is there really international backing for Israel to make a strike either at Iran, on its own soil or elsewhere? Because we hear the U.S., we hear Israel's closest allies in Europe urging restraint on Israel.
Well, first, I met today ambassadors from the African nations, and I briefed them about the situation. And, you know, some of them told me, you know, you already won. Why do you need to counter back? And I explained to them that in our region, we cannot just accept the aggression. It will bring more attacks against Israel. So now the challenge is to attack Iran in a way that it will hurt them, but it will not escalate the situation into full war. It's not easy, it's complicated, but I think we are capable of doing it. And I think Iran crossed the line once they targeted Israel from Iran. They didn't use the proxies like last time. They made a combination between sending hundreds of rockets from Iran and dozens of rockets from their proxies.
Right. Now, Israel's war cabinet is supposed to meet tonight. Of course, Iran is going to be on the agenda. So are the two other topics, Rafah, which we've discussed, and there are members of your government who feel the IDF is not acting strong enough in Gaza. They see pictures of Gazans enjoying the beach. And then on the other side, many members of the public feel the government is not doing enough to try and reach a hostage deal or that would bring home some of those hostages in Gaza. So your response to both of those?
I think there's a direct connection and linkage between those two assumptions. And I agree. We have to be more aggressive. We have to work faster. And I think we made a mistake a few months ago when we actually listened to our friends from Washington telling us to slow down, take the time, and not to operate the same way we operated at the beginning of the war. That was a mistake. We could have finished the job by now. And now is the time to go back to the same way we operated at the beginning, allowing the population to move out and entering with a lot of force to eradicate Hamas.
All right, Danny Danon, Likud member of Knesset. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you very much, Colin.
And joining us in studio, Dr. Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., former deputy Israeli minister, also Knesset member, and Reserves IDF Brigadier General Israel Relic Shafir, the former commander of the Tel Nof Air Force Base and a former combat pilot ace. Top gun of the Israeli Air Force, we should say. Gentlemen, you could certainly react to the response of Danny Danon, a ruling member of the government. But also, Michael, I do want to ask you, this whole notion of the U.S. basically saying to Israel, okay, we'll give you Rafah if you'll, in a sense, go easy on Iran. How plausible does that sound to you?
Borderline. Israel would have to convince the Biden administration that it really has a plan for moving the 1.2 Palestinians gathered along the Gaza-Egypt border out of the way of combat. That's the big concern of the administration, is more Palestinians being killed, and civilians being killed. They're coming into the threshold, the top of this election year, and the pictures coming out of Gaza, such as they came out before from central and northern Gaza, would be very injurious to the Democratic Party going into this election. And so they'd have to be very much convinced that Israel had moved this population away, could do it effectively, swiftly, with the minimum amount of Palestinian civilian casualties. Barring that, I maybe think the report is not true.
All right. And from a security standpoint, Relic, Israel has a choice. You heard Knesset member Danon saying the two are closely connected. Israel has to do Rafah and Iran. But is the IDF ready to potentially multi-front war while it still has unfinished business in Gaza? And let's, of course, not forget the hostages.
You know, it's, let me quote Nassim Taleb, who said, if you don't have a stake in the game, that is, you're not going to pay for your suggestions or ideas if they fail. So it's a little bit like Monday morning quarterbacking. If we are too aggressive in Rafah without moving part of the population, you don't have to move the whole 1.2 million, because we more or less know where the tunnels are and where the terrorists are. So you don't have to move everybody. But certainly several tens of thousands will have to be moved probably westward towards the beach area, and then you could do a slow and delicate hunt for the Hamas terrorists in the tunnels. That would be a limited and slow event without having the whole Air Force and artillery in front of the soldiers. It would take, I would say, it would be more precarious for the soldiers who are taking part. But that is a possibility for the military to do that. About Iran, for 10 years, we've been hitting Iran in Syria and Lebanon, and they kept muted. Let me also remind, after Qasem Soleimani was eliminated by the U.S., the Iranians shot a few missiles at an American base. The soldiers were well trenched. Nobody was hurt. And Trump closed this without an answer. So there are all kinds of precedents. But there are all kinds of answers that Israel could do. For instance, take hostages against the 133 hostages that we have.
From where? I'm sorry.
Let's not go into details. Okay. Let's not go into details, but we're talking about Iranians.
Okay.
So we can actually expand the type of retaliation, so to speak, that it will be under the threshold of a counterattack. This is the basic idea. Since we're not really discussing operational capabilities, I'm just throwing this as a possibility that we don't think when we're talking about overt.
I will just, in one of your, this in response to your possibilities, the Iranians supposedly calling back an intelligence ship, a ship they use for intelligence monitoring, for attack or maybe for some other kind of operation.
Well, it's not the only ship sailing around.
Okay.
No, Iran is a target-rich environment.
Right.
For us.
And there was
lots of oil refineries along the Persian Gulf.
Right, and its nuclear program, and of course today a top IRGC official saying that Iran may have to rethink its peaceful plans for its nuclear program.
That's a threat.
That's a threat, and certainly.
So why won't they do that? Because it's much better for Iran to have the ability to make a nuclear weapon than to actually have the nuclear weapon. Because they get all the advantages without holding it, and they lose those advantages once they get it.
Right. I don't think I'm sure not many people here in Israel thought that nuclear program was for peaceful purposes altogether. Well, alongside with its many battles here, Israel's also fighting on several diplomatic fronts as well, including the latest effort by the Palestinian Authority to get recognition as a full nation-state member at the United Nations. Now, a Security Council vote on that initiative is expected soon, quite soon. Well, for more, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, who is in UN headquarters in New York. And Mike, first of all, let's talk about this vote, when it's going to be and what the likely results was. The PA again trying to get statehood recognition.
Even the timing of the vote itself became contentious, Kalev, as there was a tug of war as to when to actually have it, whether it would be tomorrow when the news might be buried a little bit more, or today when many foreign ministers are here for a regularly scheduled meeting of the Security Council to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian file. In the end, we're about T-minus 4 hours to a vote here on the Palestinians' full membership application at the UN. The United States has given every indication outside of coming right out and saying it, that they will veto the membership application for the Palestinians, which has been pending since 2011. I think the broader question here is how many no votes or how many abstentions are there going to be among the 15-member council? Countries like the United Kingdom, which signaled earlier today that now may not be the right time for the Palestinians to be granted membership here at the UN as a full member. Japan, South Korea, Switzerland, other U.S. allies on the Security Council, will they abstain as well? I think that's the broader question at this point, because it will be more indicative of how, difficult the avenue will be in the future for Palestinian membership here at the UN, and whether the U.S. is completely isolated on this particular issue or not.
Right. All right. I want to move from New York to Washington, D.C., Mike, because another big vote coming up, one that certainly is of great importance to Israel, and these are on these aid bills to Israel, also to other countries such as Ukraine, which have become such a political hot potato in Washington that people are saying these votes could lead to the removal of yet another Republican House Speaker, in this case, Mike Johnson.
Mike Johnson apparently today finally learned how to play ball in the U.S. House, so he's getting a revolt from his right flank for putting together the Ukraine funding bill specifically. His right wing, which has expressed some anti-Ukraine sentiment, doesn't want it to come up for a vote, and they're threatening to file a motion to vacate, which would put Johnson's speakership up for a vote in the House. That's how Kevin McCarthy lost. Well, Johnson has figured out here that he's going to try to put a rule into the Ukraine funding bill that will raise the threshold of the number of Congress members it will take to file a motion to vacate. Right now, it's just one. Any Congress member at any time can threaten his speakership. While he's putting those two things together, now really learning how things go in the U.S. House of Representatives if you want to keep your job for the long term. So the Ukraine funding bill likely will come up first. Israel further on down the line, but it looks like the House is trying to put together everything this weekend. Some Democrats are wavering back and forth, but it looks like a combination of middle-of-the-road and conservative Democrats together with middle-of-the-road Republicans will be able to push this thing forward. The larger question, I think, down the road, will the Senate be able to take all these individual bills and put them together in some sort of coherent fashion? Remember, the Senate passed an all-encompassing foreign aid bill back in February that's just been sitting there. Now they're going to have to reconcile these two things together. But it looks like Johnson is going to rely on Democratic help, and it looks like he will get enough of it to be able to pass these Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan funding bills together with sort of a grab bag of Republican and national security priorities.
All right. Well, our concern in Israel is not over the fate of Speaker Johnson, but I think it may well be that getting Democratic support on these bills could cost him politically dearly with his own party. All right. Mike Wagenheim there in New York. We just have some breaking news. There are some siren alerts going on in northern Israel. A reminder, of course, this is coming a day after that drone strike by Hezbollah on a community center in the community of Arab El Aramshe, right near the border, which wounded 18 Israelis, 14 soldiers, and 4 civilians. I think 4 of them seriously. So now we are seeing alerts in the communities of Mayam, Baruch, Beit Hillel, Hagoshrim. So the Northern Front busy again today with both some Hezbollah strikes, Israel, of course, retaliating. Yeah.
How would no one ask, how did Hezbollah know that the soldiers were billeting in a community center?
Since he does not want to give us operational details, but we do have a former.
Yeah, I'd like to. It's a very good question because that says a lot.
Clearly, there was an intelligent. I don't know how you would say it, a defensive failure, intelligence failure, perhaps.
Well, there are all these quadcopters.
Right.
Small ones with cameras.
Like those small little drones.
Yeah, you can't see them on a radar. You can't shoot them. They don't emit enough energy to shoot them. You can, if you get their channel, you can maybe jam them. But there are some who use anti-jamming systems. And they can be flown 5 kilometers from the operator. Right. On a hill 300 meters from the border and see what's going on.
Right, and Rafah, Russia, I think it's 2 kilometers at most from the border.
So it's not a problem knowing that a certain area is not hidden from view from that area. And actually, the drone came in concurrence with an anti-tank missile that was shot.
Right.
Which takes a few seconds to reach the target. So we're talking about a complex situation along the border.
By the way, we're looking at footage that I think just perhaps could well confirm what you're talking about there.
So this is unfortunate, and this is part of the tete-a-tete that we're seeing in Lebanon, where the Israeli Air Force is striking Hezbollah strong points in Baalbek, which is close to the Beirut Damascus road, and it's the backbone of Hezbollah.
Right.
And so it's escalating very slowly. Hasn't reached the threshold of a full-scale confrontation.
Right.
Business as usual.
Right.
That's the problem. We're back to playing by Iran's rules.
Right. Well, I just also want to say, though, Michael, because the U.S., we talk about the Israel acting. The Prime Minister said the other day he respects the U.S. but has to act on its own interests. But we just heard about 2 votes there in which the U.S. Is acting on behalf of Israel. They're at the UN denying the PA, the Palestinian statehood status. And, of course, this aid bill, which is vital, pretty vital for Israel now, and which is President Biden, the Democrats, with Mike Johnson's help now, and some Republicans pushing through. So that does demonstrate some of the leverage the U.S. is holding over Israel at this moment.
It's not just leverage. They honestly care about us. And we should certainly take into consideration America's position in making any strategic decisions. But when I said that we're going back to business as usual, that means we're playing by Iran's rules again, which means their proxies shoot at us, we shoot back at their proxies, and Iran gets away scot-free. And this is the way we've been playing for the last 15 years. America plays by those rules as well, and they're ineffective. And it gives most of the cards to Iran. Iran can escalate. And now what happened in this attack in which 18 soldiers were killed, Iran is showing that they could, pinpoint where soldiers are being
wounded.
Wounded. I say killed. Sorry, we're wounded. It shows that they can actually pinpoint where our soldiers are at any point. And that's an intolerable situation for any country.
Right.
Intolerable.
Right. And well, certainly this is a difficult situation in the north. And that's why briefly, Relic.
Yeah, so we're talking about a confrontation, and there are prices to pay in a war. And we shouldn't expect to score without any scores back. It's unfortunate, but that's the face of war. And you have to grit your teeth and choose your battles. Who are you going to fight? How are you going to fight them, and when? And create a collaboration, make as many friends as possible in order to create a situation where you have more latitude. Is this what we're doing now? Not sure.
All right. Well, of course, these are the choices the government is facing. Maybe this evening at the meeting of the War Cabinet. Now, we mentioned that voted the UN over Palestinian statehood status. Israel's waging another battle at the United Nations, this time over a specific agency, the UN Relief Works Agency, or UNRWA. Now, employees for the main aid organization for Palestinians in Gaza have been accused of covering for and even colluding in Hamas terrorist activities, including on October 7th. Well, UNRWA is now shooting back in a sense at Israel, claiming its workers are being targeted and harassed by the IDF. And this dispute, of course, is complicating humanitarian aid efforts in Gaza. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more in this report.
4 people, including 2 children, were reportedly killed in an Israeli airstrike Wednesday, which hit a school in Gaza, according to the Strip's Hamas-run health ministry. Dozens more were injured, as hundreds of Palestinians were said to reside in the school run by the UN's Refugee Agency for Palestinians. There's been no immediate comment from Israel. On the other side of the world, at the UN headquarters in New York, UNRWA blamed Israel once again for preventing the organization from doing its work.
Children are bearing the brunt of this war. Across Gaza, a man-made famine is tightening its grip. In the north, infant and young children have begun to die of malnutrition and dehydration.
After intense U.S. pressure, Israel has dramatically increased the amount of food and medicine allowed to enter Gaza, saying hundreds of trucks are entering each day. The international community is welcoming the step, but urging Israel to up the humanitarian aid.
Across the border, food and clean water wait. But UNRWA is denied permission to deliver this aid and save lives.
While more aid is flowing into Gaza, Israel has long accused UNRWA of letting Hamas use its schools and spaces for terrorist activities, while promoting hate and anti-Semitism.
UNRWA's goal is not aid or real education. In practice, UNRWA is creating a sea of Palestinian refugees, millions of them, indoctrinated to believe that Israel belongs to them.
In January, Israel accused dozens of UNRWA workers of being involved in Hamas's October 7th massacre against Israel, which killed and injured thousands and started the current war in Gaza. Many countries chose to halt their support to the agency. Meanwhile, this Thursday, Algeria announced it has donated $15 million in an exceptional fund to UNRWA. UNRWA is also blaming Israel for abusing some of its workers that were detained by the IDF. Israel says it respects the rights of detainees. The U.S. says it's concerned and wants answers.
And, gentlemen, the problem with Israel, the challenges faces, is clearly UNRWA has become unacceptable to it, and yet it does have to satisfy. Just yesterday, President Biden, again, criticizing Israel, even which dramatically increased humanitarian aid into Gaza, saying, again, it's not enough.
Well, you know, there's a vacuum or a void in Gaza on who's going to take care of the civil works, starting from sewage, food, traffic, simple policing. Who is going to do it? So we can choose as Israelis to do this. Probably not a good idea. Nobody's standing in line to get this to work. So it can either be Hamas, UNRWA, or the Palestinian Authority. Make your choice. These are the 3 choices. They're all bad. So the choice is which one is the least worst. Unfortunately, this is what we have to choose. We're not choosing, so the situation is in our hands at this time.
All right. Well, yes, Michael.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
That's the choice. I think we should be entering an intimate dialogue with the Biden administration. Let's hear what they say. They say they want to revitalize revamped PA to come in and take responsibility for the Gaza Strip. Let's see how that Palestinian Authority could actually be revitalized and revamped.
While it's trying to get challenging Israel diplomatically at the UN. That is the challenge. Dr. Michael Oren, Relic Shafir, stay with us. We are going out for a brief break, but we'll have more of this special broadcast. It's day 195 of Israel at War. We'll be right back.
I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds. De la frontière qui sépare Israël. The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. now on Hot.
Just checking the sex.
Another boy. Yeah.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News, Israel at War, day 195. Now, we just, as I said before, it's just updates. There have been sirens in the north, in the eastern part of the Galilee. Just in the last few minutes, we'll bring you any up-to-date news that we have. Now, one feature of Israel's war against Hezbollah has been its success at eliminating over 270 of its fighters, including top field commanders. This is mostly through airstrikes. But there are other ways for Israel to take out threats, sometimes without taking credit for it. Now, no one has taken responsibility for last week's mysterious death of a Lebanese money changer who was seen as a key conduit for funds between Iran and Hezbollah. But now Lebanese officials are pointing the finger at Israel's Mossad intelligence agency. Emma Siegel has the story.
Pistols equipped with silencers, gloves sitting in a bucket of water and chemicals, allegedly intended to remove fingerprints and other evidence. These were the objects found in a villa on the edge of the quiet town Beit Meri in Lebanon earlier this month, where the body of Hezbollah-linked Lebanese currency exchanger Mohammed Sarrour was discovered riddled with bullet holes and surrounded by thousands of dollars in cash. And now, Lebanon's interior minister is alleging that the mysterious abduction and killing of Sarrour was likely the work of Israeli spy agency, the Mossad.
The Lebanese security agencies have suspicion or accusations that Mossad is behind this operation. Why do they have this accusation when we are always told that crimes in Lebanon are mostly or all ordinary criminal crimes and do not have a security background? Why have we shifted this accusation to a security issue related to the Mossad? According to the Lebanese security agencies, this person, his actions, and the way this crime was carried out led to this accusation. Mohammed Sarrour's activity in money exchanges are known, and it is known that he transfers money from specific parties to others.
Sarrour was sanctioned by the U.S. in 2019 for giving, quote, financial, material, technological support or other services to Hamas, and for his affiliation with Hezbollah. He was accused of transferring tens of millions of dollars annually from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to Hamas's military wing. 3 Lebanese judicial officials familiar with the investigation told the Associated Press that a man posing as a customer had contacted Sarrour from abroad and asked him to deliver a cash transfer to a woman in the mountain resort of Beit Meri. He was contacted by the same person with another request a day after his first visit. After this, his family lost contact with him.
The perpetrator of the operation is not an ordinary person seeking revenge or someone aiming for money, as money was left on the ground, as far as we know. The one who carried out the operation is someone who planned, organized, prepared himself, created the most suitable environment. Because today, the most suitable place to attract someone like the deceased is an area like Beit Mari and Monteverdi, which are secure areas. This means that if the victim wanted to exchange an amount of money, he knew he would be in a securely protected zone.
The Israeli Prime Minister's office, which oversees the Mossad, did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
And still with us in studio, Ambassador Dr. Michael Oren and Reserves Brigadier General Relik Shafir. And you were saying earlier about, Michael, about Israel not striking directly at Iran, but in a way at its various proxies of those to operate. We don't know what happened in this particular case. But even after what happened this weekend, the shadow war is it goes back. The war we could say goes back to the shadows to some degree.
It goes back to the shadows and going back to playing by the old rules, and those old rules have not in any way diminished the threat that Iran poses to us on the regional level, on the northern level, on the border, and on the strategic level.
All right. Again, we don't know what happened in that case, but we can make assumptions, perhaps. Now, Israel's war against Hamas and other terror groups over the past half year have been costly in many ways, including the literal cost of the conflict. For example, just this past weekend's defense of Iran's air attack on Israel is said to have cost the Israeli military in the area of $500 million to $1 billion. Then there's the cost of helping the evacuated populations along the Gaza and Lebanon borders and rebuilding their communities for their return, and the overall damage to the Israeli economy, with numbers coming out just this week showing a big hit to the country's GDP figures. Now, one of the ways that Israel tries to soften these blows is the sale of Israel bonds. Israel Bonds is the U.S. underwriter of debt securities issued by the Jewish state. Now, support for Israel through the purchase of these securities often spikes when Israel is facing a war or other challenges. And that's been the case certainly since October 7th. Joining us with more on that is Danny Neve, the president and CEO of Israel Bonds, speaking to us from New York. First of all, Danny, congratulations, because Israel Bonds just this week announcing a new record. Talk a little less about that.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I will get to that in a second, but you referred to the cost of that night of defense, the air defense. And I would like great success in defending from the Iranian attack is a result of decades of preparation and planning in its military, its technology, its human resources. And Israel Bonds, during the years, has played a significant role in achieving Israel's economies, and Israel economy capabilities. And every Israel Bonds investor can take a pride by knowing that you played an important role in these great achievements. And as you have mentioned, since October 7th, we managed the most successful and powerful campaign in the history of Israel Bonds. And we raised for the state of Israel about $3 billion, almost 3 times our annual regular goals prior to October 7th. And I think it's a great reflection of the huge support that the state of Israel has been receiving all over the world, and mainly, of course, here from the United States of America.
All right, so you talked about how Israel Bonds over the years has helped Israel's security in a general way, building these air defenses, et cetera. Now let's focus in on the post-October 7th period and how those funds can be applied specifically to some of the issues I just raised in the introduction to our talk.
Yes, Israel needs, following the war, is really gets to billions of dollars of requirements to finance so many important missions, from the defense to the rehabilitation of the kibbutzim, the emergency organizations, And the most, I would say, the best direct and most powerful way to provide Israel with the funds it needs is by making an investment in Israel bonds. And this is what we have been doing. We have been managing that campaign. We have great investors from all over, whether there are individuals, congregations, or federations, Jewish supporters of the State of Israel. And at the same time, we have financial institutions, different local governments and states all over the United States that find it as a great way to support the United States' best ally in the Middle East, the State of Israel, and at the same time to get nice and steady return. You know, most of our products, you can get out of that more than 5% in return, a steady, nice return as part of your fixed income investment. And many people find it as a great way to support Israel.
Right. Let's get into some of the specifics of that for those who might want to invest. I mean, I should clarify, the State of Israel also does private bond offerings, or something separate. By the way, also was bringing in billions of dollars through those offerings. But let's talk about some of the current investment opportunities there are that are out there.
We have different kind of bonds, yes, with different maturities from 2 years to 15 years. So if you already invested in Israel bonds, it's very simple. You can go to Israelbonds.com and you make a purchase today of any kind of our products. And by the way, every investment has an impact, even if it's a small investment. Or if you have not invested, so far in Israel bonds, you can go at Israelbonds.com, you can open an account and make the purchase. It's a very easy process. And by that, you provide the State of Israel today, the funds, the money that the State of Israel need, and you get a very nice return. As I've mentioned, most of our products give you more than 5% yields.
All right. Well, I would certainly say Israel bonds, an investment that offers more than just financial, that too, but certainly offers more than just financial returns. It's an investment in the future of the Jewish state and the Jewish people as well. Danny Neve, CEO of Israel Bonds, thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you, and Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Well, let's stay focused on the U.S. For a bit, which, of course, has been hit since October 7th with protests and demonstrations by anti-Israel activists. That includes companies that do business with or in Israel, or just some companies that activities think do business with Israel. Sometimes it's not even the case. This does include Google, which together with Amazon does provide cloud computing services and others for the Israeli government. That did spur pro-Palestinian protesters to stage sit-ins at the company's New York and California offices over this past week, demanding that Google end its contracts and contacts with Israel. Well, Google was not having it, and in response, it fired 28 of those activists, saying in a statement, quote, "A small number of employee presenters entered and disrupted a few of our locations, physically impeding other employees' work and preventing them from accessing our facilities, a clear violation of our policies and completely unacceptable behavior." Here is one of those activists who got the axe from Google.
We demand that Google drop Project Nimbus, the $1.2 billion contract between them and Israel. We demand that Google protect their Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian worker voices from harassment, retaliation, suppression. And we demand that Google recognize Project Nimbus as a workplace safety and health concern.
I'm not sure about the future job prospects for that young lady. Now, protests and threats have also we've seen, perhaps even to a greater degree in Europe, including the Eurovision Song Contest, which is set for early May in Malmö, Sweden. Those protests particularly targeting the participation of the Israeli competitor Eden Golan, who was forced to tone down references to the October 7th attack in her song entry in order not to be disqualified. Well, in response to concerns over violent demonstrations and terror threats, Swedish authorities have boosted their security in Malmö. Here's local officials speaking on that situation.
avoiding standing out.
Our position is that everyone is welcome, anyone who wants to contribute to what Eurovision stands for. At the same time, we understand that there is concern among visitors based on the security situation in the world today. But we work together with different actors around security issues, and we have a good and long history of managing big events. So we're confident and fully confident that various security partners who work with different parts make good and relevant assessments that we adhere to.
I think it's important that everyone feels that they can come to Eurovision and not feel anxious. We will be there with a large police force. We will get help from all over Sweden. The Swedish police are solid for this event. We work together, and we also have cooperation with our Nordic police colleagues.
Now, someone with firsthand of being targeted by these agitators is the I-24 News social media producer, India Naftali, who with her husband, Hanania, were the guests this past weekend at a pro-Israel event in a church in the northern Netherlands town of Heerenveen. Now, that event was disrupted by anti-Israel protesters, but here is how the crowd there reacted. Well, with us is our digital I-24 News digital media producer, India Naftali. It looked like people were being clashing with guards there or something. But you tell us what happened. What was this event, first of all, India?
Right. So my husband and I were invited to the Netherlands by Christians for Israel Netherlands to speak about Israel and our experience of what's been going on here in the country. Now, because my husband has quite a huge following on social media, he was picked up by the anti-Israel community in the Netherlands, and they decided, well, we're going to cancel this guy. So they went to every single one of our venues and canceled them. They forced the venues to cancel. And you know what? What they did to harm us actually helped us. We were able to book bigger venues after they went and told everyone, you can't have these people at the venue. They support Israel. So that's how we ended up in Friesland in the Netherlands. You know, Friesland is a small area in the Netherlands. It's the countryside.
Right, not so small, the province in Northern Holland.
Sure. So the village was quite small, but you know, what was amazing was 800 people showed up in this small village in the Netherlands. Meanwhile, outside, there were around 10 anti-Israel, pro-Palestine protesters chanting from the river to the sea. And some of them infiltrated the events and began to raise their flags and chant things and curses towards us. But what the most beautiful thing was, in response to the screaming, there was singing. And that's what I loved about the Dutch people. It was a group of Christians, but also Jews, that instead of screaming with hate, they responded with love. And I think, you know, these people didn't come because they hate Palestinians. They came because they love Israel and they understand what Israel's facing.
How did you feel then when you talked to those people? Because the Netherlands, a country with a large Muslim population, which also has certainly a large political sector of progressives, many of them have turned on Israel. How did you find in your dialogue with them how they're reacting to what is happening on the streets of cities like Amsterdam, like Rotterdam, and even, as you say, in some of the smaller towns there?
I received so much love from these people because they were hurt. They were hurt that this is how their guests in the Netherlands were being received. These people who love Israel, they said, we're so sorry this is how you were received in the Netherlands. And again, these people, they love the Jewish people. A lot of them are Christians, and the Jewish people oftentimes don't know how much the Christian community stands with them. I had one Jewish woman come to me and she said, I'm Jewish just like you, India, and I had no idea this many Christians stood with us. So I think there was a lot of solidarity, and also the Jewish community was touched to see that even Christians are singing a Jewish folk song to combat the hate. Instead of hate, they responded with love.
Right. I'm just curious about our guests who I'm sure do speaking engagements abroad. And I think, Michael, you were recently in the U.S. about concern that you may face this kind of agitation or even violent threats in some cases.
It's not a concern. It happens.
Okay. Well, tell us about.
But I'd have to ask India, what kind of security did you have? So I go to a university recently in northern Florida, and in the past I'd have a couple of policemen guarding me. I had dozens of policemen guarding me. I had an armored car on an APC following me around everywhere I went. And there were protesters, and they tried to break in, but the cops stopped them, and very big cops.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We did have the security, like you said. So if in the video you can see them getting dragged out, and
in the background we saw in the sort of balcony
that they had them, and it's so sad that we do have to have them.
And there are more and more of them.
And they don't need security because, you saw how we responded.
Yeah.
Instead of swinging, we sang.
It's
swinging
great.
fists.
It's fabulous.
Right.
And that's why it's sad that we need security in
At another university, I was not allowed in the same room with the students. They had to have it streamed in because they were too afraid that there'd be a riot inside the university.
Let me ask you, Andy, because you put out on social media or on Instagram, and it goes on Facebook, I guess, our TikTok accounts too, the battleground of social media. How has it been running? Have the reactions that you've been getting, I guess, from both sides in this issue?
Caleb, one of the journalists asked my husband and I, it's easy, they said, why are you coming to the Netherlands? It's so easy for you to come and talk to people who already love Israel. But we responded to her and we said, listen, we on social media every single day are talking to people who hate us and don't agree with us. We're not afraid to answer these hard questions. So you're right, Caleb, and there's a war ground on social media. But I think the best way to respond is to continue speaking, not being the silent majority, because I think right now what we're seeing in the Netherlands is there's a lot of people who support Israel, but they're afraid. You see these threatening people, and they're afraid to speak up. And now I think because we're standing together, because we're seeing moments like these on social media, people are being less afraid to speak up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, Ralph.
The chant from the river to the sea is so abusive that a lot of people understand that the next thing that will happen is Chicago will be free, or Milwaukee, or the Netherlands will be free. Well,
I do have to say, just in the past few weeks, we have seen, and there's been controversy in America, the death to Israel chants in some cases have become death to America chants in American cities, and that has become...
So sometimes the chants or the using a verbiage that is so abusive works for you, because that means they're negating our right to exist, not just what piece of land can we trade or what kind of peace can we have. So this is something that can work for us if we're able to use this in showing the people there that it's just a matter of time until they are called from one place to the next in Muslim or Palestinian, or for that matter, a non-local entity that should be wiped out, so to speak.
All right. I want to thank all our guests for coming. Dr. Michael Oren, Relic Shafir in India, and Naftali. Wish you all also happy Passover, Pesach in the coming holiday. Thank you for joining us on this program. We are going to end, though, with something on a positive note, I think. A heartwarming story. It is connected with Gaza, about two friends, Avi and Aviad, who have undergone a unique experience. 1 year after Aviad donated his kidney to Avi, they both ended up serving in Gaza, making their bond stronger than ever. I would think so. More Ellen and Chana Rifkin bring us their story. Let's take a look.
Do you know that they're going to put me in jail if you go on TV with that blue tongue?
A life worth living and finding yourself worthy of it. This is Avi Capone's mission. This mentality comes from his experience as a lifelong kidney patient with a unique story. Making it even more unique is that chance dictated that he would end up fighting in Gaza alongside his donor.
I donated a kidney to him. Adina, Avi's wife, and my wife, Aviva,
have been friends for many years, and we know each other through them.
How they ended up here, of course, started with a first date and a fateful journey.
Pretty early on, when I met Adina, I told her that I have a kidney disease, that one day would get to the point that I would need a transplant. From there, it started rolling. She saved my life. I owe her now.
Eventually, he was informed that this was the progress of the disease. I said that I would gladly donate mine.
It was a no-brainer. Aviad got tested, and he was a match.
היי אביעד לך יקר, קשה להאמין, אבל עשינו את זה. זה פשוט לא יאומן. פשוט לא יאומן. קשה לתאר במילים.
בוקר טוב אבי, מה העניינים? אתה נראה מצוין. שמח לשמוע שנראה שהכל נקלט מצוין ושזה עבר על הצד הטוב ביותר. אני גם מרגיש על הכיפק.
אני המשבר הנפשי הכי גדול שהיה לי הוא היה
The biggest breakdown that I had was on the first Saturday after the transplant, while I was still in hospital, and I realized there's no possibility of returning the favor. In everyday life, you receive favors that you can pay back. All that's left to do is to be worthy of it, to be worthy in the way that you live and behave, to be worthy of this unbelievable thing.
And then, fast forward more than a year to October 7th.
In the first week of the war, I was in Reim. From October 8th, Avi was in the same area with his unit. We didn't meet up, but I was told that someone from that unit was looking for me, so we texted each other. I realized it was him. We went on patrol together. Inside Gaza, we weren't together. We were there at different times and different places.
But seeing each other when they could. Both volunteered for reserve duty.
When I went to war, I saw it as a war of virtue, and the only person I asked an opinion from was Aviad's wife, Aviva. And thankfully she said, "Go, do what you have to do, and if you lose this kidney as well, I will donate you my own."
Avi explains that being a combat fighter and a kidney patient isn't simple, but it is something he's learned to manage.
Like many other things in life, when you're determined, things work out. I have been a combat fighter for many years, and I was a kidney patient for many years as a soldier while fighting in wars. Since Operation Defensive Shield in 2002, my kidney function has been 50%, as well as during the Second Lebanon War in 2006 and Operation Protective Edge in 2014. I know how to handle the disease with the medications, the pills, during combat.
And this is how Avi lives a worthy life. He and Aviad want others who are going through similar conditions to know that limitations are not as limiting as one may think. Kidney patients and kidney donors can do just as much as anyone else.
There are some consequences. It's something that's important to say. It's a very important process which definitely saves lives. And that's why I think it's worth the price. But it needs to be said that the decision to donate a kidney should be taken seriously.
Since the war began, their bond has only become stronger. More Ellen and Chana Rifkin for I-24 News.
What the hell is with your tongue?
What a great story, and continued good health and long life to both of those remarkable gentlemen. Just an update on a story we reported on earlier. As we said, a vote will be coming either later today or tomorrow at the United Nations, the latest bid by the Palestinian Authority to attain full statehood status at the United Nations. The U.S. now officially announcing it will veto that motion. It was expected, but now it's official, thus guaranteeing its defeat in the Security Council. That ends this program for the evening. Of course, you can continue to follow us